Hello guys, today we are going to speak with Andrea. He is here with his fighting game. And well, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Andrea and I'm an Italian guy studying physics in Germany. So basically I'm doing a PhD here. But in the meantime, I'm decided to develop a 3D fighting game and basically I'm going to work on this until its completion.
In a nutshell, what kind of game are we talking about?
Well, like when I told about a 3D fighting games, I'm talking about a game like Tekken 2 or Soul Edge. Let's say these early 90s 3D fighting games. So with three-dimensional movement and some of the classical mechanics of 3D fighting games. So like sidestepping and a complete control of spacing, but with graphics and a feeling that should remind the old arcades that all the 90s, in which all the 90s kids played these games.
Why did you choose to make a game like this?
Well, I think that the answer to this question is partly contained in the previous answer. I was one of these 90s kids who was spending their afternoon playing Tekken 2 at the local arcade, just spending their money trying to get to the last round of the arcade with these low poly graphics that day it looked so awesome. And I was kind of bored of 2D fighting games, and basically Tekken changed my life as a gamer. And I wanted to build this game as a love letter to this kind of 3D arcade games. Secondly, there was the idea for this game started in 2015 when I realized that even if on consoles there were so many of these really good games, like just think about the Soul Calibur series or the Tekken series, on PC things were lagging back. Back in 2015, there was no Tekken 7 on PC. There was basically a complete selection of 2D fighting games like Blaze Blue, Guilty Gear, but no real 3D fighting game. And I started wondering why. I started asking myself what was the reason for this deficiency. And then I got struck with the idea to try to build one using the concepts and the characters that I have developed in something like 10 to 15 years, because the idea for this game just goes back to when I was that kid going to the arcade. I was always wondering, I will ever be able to do something like this, and I decided that this was the right time to do this.
Is the game becoming what you planned it to become?
Yes, it is, in the sense that I feel it managed to get some sort of nostalgia feeling, but still has a solid gameplay which doesn't look dated. In the sense, it's not as stiff as probably the first Virtua Fighter or the first Tekken was, but still retains a sort of low poly aesthetics and the same space managing that these games had. In addition, actually the game is becoming even a bit more than I forecasted at the beginning. Because when I started, I didn't expect to manage to build more than 10, 12 characters, even if my dream was to go 20, but I realistically thought I couldn't go above 12 and keep things balanced. But now I think that I could strike 16 to 18 characters and still keep the game balanced, and even add some layers of customization that could make also the game engine reusable for new projects after this one, and also by other people. So I would say that the direction is exactly the one I wanted at the beginning, and maybe even better.
What inspired you to become an indie game developer?
Well, this is something which dates back to when I was in high school. It is I always wanted to make games, but for one reason or another, I never could until I was at the very end of my high school. That is, didn't have the technological means. My computer, we had a computer that my father used for working, but so I didn't have access to any coding tools and no programming at all. Basically, until I hit the first year of university or something like this. And I basically started with tools like Game Maker or RPG Maker or several iterations of RPG Maker. And this is where I learned how to code. Basically, RPG Maker told me how to code, and then I could transfer these skills to C++ and to other programming language. And so I say that I'm into game development since almost 10 years by now. But I never released something commercially until now. This could be maybe the first game I will publish commercially.
So this is your first game?
Let's say not first completed. That is, I have completed a couple smaller projects which were released for free, let's say. Since they were mostly fun games, one was a shoot 'em up, which was inspired by Aero Fighters 2. Speaking of arcades in the 90s, I don't know if this was released as a free fun game on Game Jolt 2 years ago, and I completed a couple RPG Maker games, but obviously never went commercial. And if I have to say, this is my first really big project. And when big project, I mean the first project in which I don't go for fun games or recycled assets or something like this, but I'm making everything from scratch. That is, every single asset in this game is some original content. So it says it's not some sort of glorified fun game or some sort of reskinned version or something trying to get to use components from other games. It's something completely original, and of this I'm most proud at the moment.
What do you think is your best attitude in life?
The fact that if I am really interested in something, I go until the very end on that. I have had my fair share of abandoned projects, but every one of them gave me something, and that I could use later in some later project. And in this case, I think that is the force of will that I have after 8 hours or more in the lab or programming computer stuff for my PhD, to go home and work until late hours just to make a 3D model or trying to fix a bug in the code. So I would say the force of will to do what the force of will to dedicate myself to this project every day and without faltering.
What is your day-to-day process into making this game?
So basically now the game is quite in an advanced state, so I don't have to code so much anymore. But basically, the day-per-day routine is something like 1 to 3 hours bug fixing or implementing new features in code, and the remaining time modeling meshes in Blender or trying to find some Creative Commons soundtrack for the stages I am building and I still have no music for. So I would say it's something like 70% building and 30% resource finding or building.
Will that be the same for future games you make?
Yeah, I believe so. At least it depends. If I remain if I remain as an independent developer, probably this will be the same, with a small difference. The point is, this project is a solo project. So that is, I'm the developer, scenario writer, game designer, 3D animator, 3D modeler, 3D animator, and so on and so forth, all together. So obviously, if I would go next, I would try to get to a project in which I could go even better. And for this, I would probably try to get a team working, at least for the assets, because I know my limits. I know that I cannot do more than PlayStation 1 like models or graphics with my own skill for now. So I think that in the future I would probably try to get someone on the boat.
Well, if a game looks good, it will probably sell better, so that would help you.
Yeah.
What were your biggest inspirations into making this game? Is that just Tekken and all, or?
We can say that there are two layers of inspiration. As regards gameplay, definitely Tekken for the 3D fighting game in general. Soul Calibur and Soul Edge for the guard impact mechanics. That is some sort of... I don't know if you are familiar with the guard impact concept in Soul Calibur, for example. That lets you if you time properly an attack, you can you can deflect the opponent attack without suffering damage. And I implemented something similar in the game. And another source of inspiration was also Dead or Alive was a good inspiration for the button layout. That is only one button for kick, one for punch, and one for throws. But I have to say that I could say that all the fighting games that I played, both 2D and 3D, have left me something that I have transposed into these games in some way or another. As regards the character design, the biggest inspiration are again the 90s. I don't know if it will appear clear to someone who gets this game, but at least some of the character design are heavily inspired from cartoons that were hiring in the 90s, like with all the mutants and so on. My game, there is a shark man, there is a guy who dresses in yellow like the Mask. Actually, this is something sketchy because I didn't understood that he was inspired by to the Mask until recently when someone told me that he looked like him. And this is something that I've been unconsciously or consciously inspired by several sources that they are all dating back to the early 90s.
What will make this game different from others?
Well, despite being heavily inspired by other 3D fighting games, I have implemented some concepts that are not found everywhere. So, for example, even if the game is the ground game of Soul Calibur, that is with a button guard and a 8-direction movement, it has also a air game, which is more proper of 2D fighting games. That is jumping attacks and juggles have a huge role in the game, especially for closing distance. And moreover, I have introduced a mechanic that I don't think I found in any other game until now, which is basically instead of using super bars, like for example Street Fighter, every character starts with 6 counters, which are, I call it in game, bullet counters, and can be used either offensively or defensively. But offensively, they will just make every attack which use them guard breaking, and will open up for a combo. It will make basically every hit increase the hit stun, so that attacks that normally cannot chain will chain together, or defensively performing something like what Soul Edge guard impact. The interesting thing is bullet counters cannot be regenerated. So you start with 6 at the beginning of the match, and then you have to get to the end without being able to regenerate them during the fight. That is, every time around ends, you get 1 or 2 more, depending whether you lost or won the previous round, but that's it. So it's another layer of management, because you have to understand that if you finish your triggers, your bullet counters, and your opponent has 1, he can perform a combo on you without you being able to retaliate. So I think that this strategic element will add a bit of feeling to the game, and I think that I have made quite a good job with making it play in an interesting way.
What engine are you using, or are you making the engine all on your own?
Well, not completely on my own. I have decided to go for the Irlicht game engine. It's an open source 3D engine for 3D games, which it's a bit dated until by now. That is, it's still supporting up to DirectX 9 and it supports up to DirectX 9, and it has some limitations. But the reason I decided for it was that this at the beginning this game started also as a way to try and start making a 3D game for the first time. I always worked in 2D before, and since I am proficient in C++, and Irlicht was a lot easier than Unreal Engine 4 that my computer couldn't even handle at that time, I decided to go for that. I knew Irlicht for a lot of time, and I knew that one could do something which looked decent, with a decent amount of effort, and there is an active community. There is still an active community, lots of tutorials, and so for the graphics I used it. While for the rest, that is for the audio, I used other libraries because there were no libraries included, so I have used SFML. While for the rest, so game logic and everything else, I built it from scratch. So I didn't use a dedicated fighting game engine. I have built it basically on my own, using just the graphic part from another engine.
What setbacks did you encounter during the project? And do you think that added any value to the experience?
Define setbacks, you mean problems or?
Yes, problems.
Well, we can say many of them. The first one was starting a project so big. This, as I told you, was my very first big project. I've never put together such a huge game on my own, and without having an engine. Let's say without having what you see is what you get engine or something like that. So the shortcoming, the setbacks were basically it was hard to start. It was hard to put together things and make them work nicely. One of the things which made me swear the most was, for example, building up the input buffer, because it isn't so that the game was responsive enough for being called a fighting game. I have spent quite a lot of time on, I've spent quite a lot of time and lots of evening trying to code something which now is expected to be in every game, but from the developer side is quite difficult. And another shortcoming is I'm not sure I will be able to implement online play, and this is something which I find extremely hard. That is, I will think about it, but at the moment this is a huge issue because I know that alone for how the things are going, I cannot implement it, and this is just a huge problem at the moment for me.
You can always learn things. You can always learn things.
Yeah, as I told you, this project for me was also the process of learning enough stuff. Before this project, I've never coded a game in 3D, but now I've learned a lot about 3D geometry, on how to use matrices, 3D matrices for projecting stuff or drawing stuff. I learned a lot about pixel shaders and vertex shaders. So that is, if I had to make a balance, I have learned so much in the last 2 years that I've learned more in the last 2 years about game development than in the previous 20. So it's really worth the effort.
If you could go back in time, what would you do different?
What I would change in what, in this game in general, or
mainly in this game?
Yeah.
I mean, if we make a list of everything in life, then
no,
we would be sitting here for a few hours.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't even do this. Well, I think that the first thing I would do would be probably. This is a tough question, but I would reorganize some of the code. That is, at the moment I have a huge code base that I have basically written in the last 2 years, and sometimes I find it quite hard to modify some things that I have built at the very beginning. And refactoring it costs usually a lot of time. That is, I usually have to take 1 full day if I want to redo all the parts in a way which is more easily modifiable. So this is something that I would redo better. And another thing I would redo, I would try to get more coverage for the game already from the pre-alpha, because I underestimated the power of marketing and I've really underestimated the issue with marketing at the beginning. And this I would definitely change.
If you can advise a new indie game developer, what would you tell him?
Yeah, exactly what I told you in the last question, that they shouldn't, they really shouldn't forget about marketing, because you could have built the best game ever, but if nobody knows that it exists, then it's just like wasted time. It's try to get your games featured, or maybe not put it everywhere, because it's you can't put it everywhere and be sure that you will be responsive enough. But make a nice game page, make a nice press kit, put screenshots and make such that people that see your game release are actually willing to try it out. And especially when you're releasing a demo or are releasing an alpha, try to get in touch with the press or to get some coverage. Because actually marketing is one of the parts that when you start developing for something for the first time, you don't think about, and then you realize only later how much important is it.
I can agree on that as a marketing guy.
Yeah, but it is, you have to understand that it's not something that everyone thinks just at the beginning. It is, you realize it only when you think you think about, if you're not in the environment, let's say, if you're not a marketing guy, sometimes it's something that you don't realize at the beginning how important it is. And this is why I would tell that if I would go back, this would be one thing that I would change. And I totally agree with you.
What do you feel is success for an indie game developer?
Well, it depends. That is, I'm of the idea that we have seen in the last few years a couple really successful indie games. That is, I can name a few. There is Undertale. It had a huge success, but because it was a nice game and the author was really good at creating a community around this game who supported it and kept on making a success. Then there are other games like, for example, Axiom Verge, which is a really good Metroidvania and now is being released on Switch, or released on Nintendo Switch. So that is, I would tell a lie if I say that there is no possibility to get really good as an indie game developer. But I think that in most of the cases, if you are managing to build a community, even a small community around your game, and we are achieving 2 results. Having a community supporting you is already maybe the biggest success, in my opinion. Because if you can manage to build a community around your game, it will be even likelier that if you will produce another game in the future, the same community will help you in some way, spreading the word and so on. So I would say that if you can make a good game and you can interest enough people to create an active community around it, this is what I would call a success.
Well, I agree. To help other developers learn, what resources would you recommend?
Well, fortunately we live in an age in which it's really easy to find learning resources on the internet. That is, it's quite easy to look around and see and find tutorials even on YouTube or written tutorials. What I would say is the easiest way to learn is to try and fail again. Taking any My advice, maybe I don't know if it's universally acceptable, but my advice is just to start with one of these game development tool like Game Maker or RPG Maker, and just get accustomed, because if you didn't program before, you will at least get the programming logic out of it. At least this is what happened to me. I didn't have any programming logic. Then I started playing with RPG Maker and just using, not even using the advanced features. After 1 year, I realized that I had gathered all the logic that it would have been extremely valuable for me in the future. So my advice is, if you want to, from the coding side, if you want to start developing, you should start small. You should start from I would start from a game making program and use it as the first step to understand how things works. And then I would expand. I would try to dare and try to start building on the top of another engine, or switch to more complicated engine like Unity or UE4. It's like going step by step. Don't start with the biggest engine if you don't have any experience with easier things. This is my advice. Maybe it's just trivial advice, but this is what I would suggest to someone who starts this.
Well, you were the first one with a long and good answer to this question, so you did well.
Okay.
What do you think about the current marketing strategies in the indie game industry?
Yeah, okay. As you probably understood, I'm lacking marketing skill, as this is what I told you before. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think that at the moment there are so many games and going out every month or so. That is, I've seen some figures from Steam of the number of games released per year. That is actually increasing exponentially. And it's, I think it's quite hard to emerge, even if you have a good game sometimes. So marketing becomes extremely important in this point. And I think that most of the indie game industry, I think it's hard for an indie developer to really stand out if either their product is not excellent or there is not a marketing strategy out of it. Because at the very end, I think that the biggest issue is to make people aware that your game exists. I have found that there are so many good indie games around that I didn't know anything about because they aren't covered by the press, for example, or they are not covered by journals or specialized press sometimes. So I think that the whole approach would have to be in some way written off. Maybe you should first build a community and then build your game, or the two things together. Because if you could manage to build an active community around your game, this will probably be the most successful idea to get you a name and get your game go. But this is hard. Unfortunately, I don't have a good idea on how to do this, at least not on my own.
It's kind of funny how you say, well, let's build a community and then build a game. And you have a community, but no game.
Well, okay, I will rephrase it. That is, for example, I was still thinking about the creator of Undertale, Toby Fox, was already quite well known before in a small community because he was making professional audio for a really long running webcomic and other stuff, and he was quite also known because he made a mod for Earthbound, by name, the game. Mm-hmm. It was he made a hack mod of Earthbound that went quite famous in the circle of players of Earthbound, and so he created a sort of interest when he started telling that he would have done a game. This is what I mean. That is, if people already know you for some of your previous work, it's easier maybe to spread the word of mouth. Then, obviously, I think that 99% of the time, if you manage to build a community, and I remarked the if, it's probably after your game is at least in an alpha stage. That is, if you have something to show. I think it's quite difficult to get your interest only with a trailer and a couple screenshots, unless they are of extremely good quality.
Where do you see the indie game market going in a few years?
Well, I think that we are reaching some sort of saturation in the sense that the number of games that are released per year is increasing so much, and that it will be even harder to emerge. But I think that this would not be so bad, because the game that will emerge out of this indie game market will be probably the best out of it, or the one who have managed to use at best their characteristics to emerge. So I would say not that different from today. The only thing is probably much more competition and much more run for the visibility, so much more difficult to emerge. But I wouldn't say that this will affect the quality. That is, this won't. I don't think this will take the quality of the games down.
Have you ever worked for some kind of game company, or have you always been on your own?
Well, I don't know if it counts, but I worked as a character designer and music composer for a small company and for a mobile game some years ago. So no coding position, but I was basically character designer for a small Windows Phone game which was called Cog Factory, and I composed some music for it and made the design of the main characters and 3 or 4 bosses. But as far as I can tell, this was my one experience in the game industry before starting my own game.
Did you get any gaming-related education at school, or did you learn it all on your own on the internet?
Well, as I told you, my first steps were with RPG Maker XP, so I have been self-taught in this, and then I just basically I have exploited my university studies to get better. That is, I had a C++ class in my first year in physics, and I basically used everything I could out of it to connect it to game development and improve my programming skills so that I could apply it back to RPG Maker. It was another language, but it was just like the same principles, and get better at it. So no, not directly, no. But
where did you grow up?
Yeah, in Italy, I would say, but I don't know if you want me to be more specific.
Well, if you want to be more specific, I mean, I have been in Italy. I know that it's a huge country.
Yeah,
a lot of different stuff.
So I will just say North Italy on the sea. So where so nice climate, nice weather, not like where I live now, but definitely a place which will let me enjoy some fresh air and some really nice summer holidays.
Well, that's probably where I've been then. What were your childhood interests?
Well, it's crazy because I think that most of them I keep on being interested today. So I'm still a lot into drawing, drawing, and video game making. When I was a child, I was telling I will build a fighting game. I found out some diaries from elementary school in which I have drawn the exact same characters that now are playing in the game. That is, I'm not joking, that is the first design of some of these characters. It's dating back 17 years. And I always wanted to build my fighting game. And when I finally had the time and the will to do this, this was just a sort of, I don't know how to put it. It was quite something that I always wanted to do. And in the meanwhile, I have many interests in creative stuff. So drawing, music composition, and drawing is also from childhood. And music composition now is a bit later. But I wouldn't have bet that I would have become a researcher in physics, and that I would have worked on interferometry and stuff like, and antimatter and stuff like that. but still I kept all my passions as hobbies. So I'm basically living two lives.
Well, that was the last question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for answering all my questions.
Oh, you're well. It's me to thank you for the interest.
Well, that's no problem. I mean, every developer has its own story, and they are all different, so it's kind of interesting. Sometimes, most of the time.
I hope I haven't. I hope this was not boring for you.
No, you gave some good answers. Mainly on questions where I normally get no answer or like yes or no. So that's pretty good. Yeah.
Cypher wins. Round Round 1. Fight. KO. Wally wins. Round 2. Fight. KO. Wally wins. Round 1. Fight. KO. Tutorial man wins. Round 2. Fight. Tutorial man wins. Round 1. Fight. Donner wins. Round 2. Fight. Donner wins.